Hey guys, how's it going? So I returned to you after a 2-week hiatus. I'm not going to go in depth about why I wanted to go on a hiatus, and I don't really think there was any particular reason. I really do just think I needed a short break, and I did enjoy my short break, but I'm really excited to be back, so I hope you've all been good while I've been away. I also haven't been watching as much BookTube as I usually would while I've been away, so I will be catching up on some BookTube this week. But anyway, I wanted to, return with just a casual video talking about the books that I read in February. So I will just leap right in and start with the first book that I finished, which was the Laxdaela Saga, which I read in this Penguin Deluxe Classics edition. This was a part of Sagalong, which is a read-along of a bunch of Icelandic sagas that I was ostensibly one of the hosts for, but which I kind of shamefully just dropped out of halfway through when I announced my hiatus, and I feel really bad about that, and I did apologize to my fellow hosts. I don't think that they're going to come and spread eagle, or whatever the torture is. I don't think they're gonna come and take my head for it or something like that. But anyway, I did stay in for the Laxdaela Saga, and I will leave a link to my 2 videos on the Laxdaela Saga. I won't talk about it too much here, but I ended up finding it a bit underwhelming. I found it mostly interesting as a window into Norse society in the Middle Ages than I did as a work of drama. Although the main female character, Gudrun, I think is a really compelling character. Yeah, on the whole, it was just a bit underwhelming for me. The second book that I finished this month was from this big book. This is The Complete Poems of William Blake. What I read from it was The Songs of Innocence and of Experience. And this was my second time reading that book, and normally I wouldn't read a volume of poetry from beginning to end. It's just usually not the way that I read poetry. I like to just skip around and read poems that strike my fancy, because I find that that's the way I get the most enjoyment out of it. But Songs of Innocence and Experience is literally like 50 pages long, and the poems in them are all very short, very easy, very sing-songy, very simple, but are, poignant and I think pretty profound in their own way, and I loved reading it for the second time. One poem, The Fly, I liked in particular, and I actually memorized it, so it has been added to the small repository of poems up in my head, which is not all that big. I don't have that many poems memorized, but The Fly is now one of them. But yeah, I really liked that. Third book I finished this month was The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, by, obviously, Frederick Douglass. And, yeah, I doubt that this needs much of an introduction. I thought it was excellent. It was simply and eloquently written, which I always love. I really want to read more of Frederick Douglass's writings. I know he wrote 2 other autobiographies that get progressively longer. This one you can read in literally one sitting. But I obviously found the window into the lives of American slaves that it provides very interesting, and I also, obviously, like many readers, really liked Frederick Douglass's discussion of reading and how learning to read was so important for him and was important in his sort of awakening and realizing how awful the situation he was in was and how it could be better, and also just, about his love of reading and such. But what I honestly found most interesting, aside from those, which I both did obviously find very interesting, what I found most interesting was this common theme of the sort of psychology of slaveholders. It's sort of horrifically fascinating the way that people who own slaves would turn into these sadistic monsters. Because some of these, the men who would oversee the slaves, who would make sure that they were getting their work done and not misbehaving anything, they would beat or whip senseless a slave for the, smallest infraction, and you have to think that there's more to that than discipline, you have to think that there is some horrible, pleasure that they take in beating these people to death. I'm sort of, again, horrifically fascinated by how a person can be corrupted to a point where they just, will want to torture another human for pleasure, in a way. And also, the slaveholders who weren't necessarily directly involved in overseeing the slave, but who were the actual owners, who were the, aristocracy, so to speak, them too, there's this one particular instance that I found interesting where a woman, the wife of the slave owner, she started out wanting to be very kind to her slaves, and she was the one who actually started to teach Frederick Douglass how to read. But Frederick Douglass talked about how just slowly, within a brief time, just after being a slaveholder and having the experience of holding power over slaves, she became sort of corrupted and started treating them like subhuman animals within a few months. And after that, she refused to continue to teach him to read, and treated him like trash, like she treated everyone else. And I'm just kind of fascinated by how people can make that turn. How does that work? I don't know. It's kind of like when you learn about Nazis and the things that they did, and it's like, how can a normal person turn from just going about their business to being this murderous, sadistic, torturer? So I was fascinated by that as well. But yeah, I really like this. Next is a buddy read. So this is The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. I read this with Sharon Goforth, and we both found it very interesting, but this book on a whole was a mixed bag for us. While this whole idea of a monomyth and collective unconscious and a sort of universal story that drives all of our brains, I guess, are really compelling, the book itself just really doesn't cohere as an argument or as a piece of writing. It often just feels like a bunch of lecture notes that Joseph Campbell kind of cobbled together and had published. The chapters don't seem very well crafted. Each chapter of a book, in my mind, should be a sort of essay with a logical story or argument leading up to a sort of climactic point. And the chapters in this book just don't. They just kind of seems like, Joseph Campbell will make a few points here and there that won't really seem all that connected, and then we'll just stop writing once he runs out of things to say. And so that, to me, was just weak on a writerly basis. But also, the mythological stories that he discusses to support his arguments about this sort of monomyth, in many instances, didn't really seem to actually support the argument he was making. It was often hard for me to see why certain stories he chose to discuss were at all relevant. And he often wouldn't really elaborate on why a certain story that he's talking about is relevant. He would just make this grand assertion about some archetype in mythology, about, the caring mother or the Virgin Mary or something, and then go right into this story about something, and then just end there. He would just tell the story, and then that would be that, and he wouldn't articulate why the story was important to his point, right? And so the book just didn't really cohere as an argument to me, and so I'm not really convinced. So that's a disappointment, because it's a book that's been on my bucket list for so long, and which so many people have cited as hugely influential for them, and some people on BookTube I know love. And I'd love to hear from some of you who do love this book. Why do you love it? Why did you like it so much? I'm honestly curious. I'm not trying to start an argument. I just really want to know why so many people like it, when Sharon and I just weren't all that impressed. We did have a lot of fun with the buddy read, though. I think we both had a lot of fun discussing some of the more interesting points in it, and also occasionally tearing it to shreds. So yeah, that was a bit of a mixed bag, but still, worth reading, I think. I will say, to end out, I'm glad I read it, just to get it as a cultural touch point, because it is obviously very influential, I think, in our wider culture, especially with Star Wars, or George Lucas citing it for the Star Wars saga and such, though. Anyway, moving on to my book that is probably my book of the month. This is Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. So this is a collection of essays published in 2014. Go me, reading something that recent. This is a collection of essays on racial issues, women's issues, social issues, and specifically how those concepts are portrayed in our sort of popular culture, especially in film and television, but also in the news and occasionally in books as well. this was a great read. It's written in a really casual, conversational tone that's really easy to follow, and, you know, I don't think any essay in here is any longer than, like, 15 pages, and that sort of makes it fly by as well. You know, I think that the points that she makes in her essays about, you know, sexism, racism, the portrayal of women and minorities in our culture and such, I don't think any of those points are all that original. You know, I think they've probably been made many times over on Twitter arguments and other books, but I think she articulates them really well, and again, really accessibly, which is why I think I'm going to hold on to this book. You know, I found myself just nodding along for a lot of it. I found that, yeah, she just articulated a lot of points that I've made to, you know, people, really, really well. And so I, you know, would see myself quoting this, when I'm trying to make a point regarding, you know, again, the portrayal of women or minorities in our society and such. So, yeah, I really liked this, and, you know, would love to hear from other people who've read it, or anyone, and would recommend it to those who haven't read it. And then, finally, the last book that I finished after, like, a year of chipping away at it is, Essays, First and Second Series by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and, you know, I loved this. I love Emerson's writing. His prose is just gorgeous. There are so many quotes in this that I added to my commonplace Word document where I write down quotes that I love. You know, I think Emerson, what he's great about is he will take ideas that seem mundane and self-evident and perhaps obvious to people who are less intelligent than Ralph Waldo Emerson, and just look at them from every possible angle, and through that finds why they're actually profound and important to think about. You know, and I mean, you can see that in the titles of his essays, you know, art, you know, the poet, experience, love. You know, these are simple concepts that he's just dissecting in every way possible and showing you why they're worthy of deep thought and why they're important as well, and doing it in just, you know, absolutely lovely prose that, you know, is worthy of any poet. Yeah, Emerson is definitely one of my favorites. One of my favorite American classics, I think. And finally, another book that I have continued to work on. It's again a buddy read, this time with Patrice Jones. This is The Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin. We have less than 200 pages to go. I promise you all that I will be able to hold this up and tell you that I finished it later this month. We're going to finish it, I think, in the next 2 weeks or so. But we're both still absolutely loving it. I don't have much else to add other than that it's just a great discussion of American politics and the Civil War, and a great insight into just the way Abraham Lincoln's mind worked in terms of how he sort of played off his rivals, members of administration who were sort of rivals with each other, against each other and with each other, and got them to work together and such. Yeah, it's just great. I might try to make a video about it, but we will see. And anyway, that leads me into the sort of second half of this video, which is more of a TBR. So obviously this month is March of the Mammoths, which begins today. And I am actually going to throw myself a bone and count Team of Rivals as one of my mammoths, because even though the body of the text is only 754 pages, the entire book as a whole is 916 pages. So I'm just throwing myself a bone and counting it because I just feel like it. So that's my first mammoth. The next and the central one is going to be a buddy read. I'm buddy reading it with Noah over at Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse, and it's Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which I have already begun. I've read the first 50 pages, but I'm not going to spoil what I think of it. I hope I can do a whole video about it. Yeah, we're going to be reading that throughout the month. Another book that I will be reading for March of the Mammoth is this. This is Cultural Amnesia, Necessary Memories from History and the Arts by Clive James. And this is a big collection of basically short biographical essays about a bunch of famous intellectuals, celebrities, artists, musicians, writers, etc., that basically are meant to sort of look at humanism in the 20th century, 20th and 21st century, and try to reassert the value of humanism, and through that also reassert the value of liberal democracies against the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th and now 21st century. And there are going to be people you've heard of that he discusses here: Anna Akhmatova, Louis Armstrong, Walter Benjamin, Albert Camus, Miles Davis, Alfred Einstein, Federico Fellini, John Keats, and it focuses on the 20th century people. But obviously, as you know, now that I've just said John Keats, there are a few interlopers from earlier periods there, but. Yeah, none of these essays is longer than like 20 pages, it seems. And they're really just meditations on these people and the sort of influence they have and the most important ideas that they had and how they're still relevant today, basically. I did buy... I didn't buy this. A friend offered to buy it for me as a birthday present. So I allowed one exception to this whole year of reading one's own thing. But in my defense, I have gotten rid of several books recently, so I am counting that as making up for the fact that I have acquired this book. But it is over 800 pages, like 860 pages or so. So yeah, I'll be reading that this month as well. And then finally, this book isn't for March of the Mammoth, but it is another buddy read. This is Freethinkers, A History of American Secularism by Susan Jacoby, which I'll be buddy reading with Sharon Goforth. And, I think we're both excited about this. I think it should be really interesting. The title kind of explains what it's about, and I've read the introduction and was really impressed with the writing. So I am definitely looking forward to making my way through this with Sharon. I think we'll have some interesting discussions. So anyway, I'm really happy to be back, like I said. I mean, I was only away for 2 weeks, but still. I still missed BookTube. So, as always, give me any thoughts if you've read these books or are interested in these books, and I hope you're all having a good Sunday, and I will talk to you all later. Bye, guys.